Hey everybody, Joe Joseph here for the DailySheeple.com's Daily News Brief. So let's get started. First of all, I hope that everybody had a safe and happy holiday. And today I'm going to go over a little bit about Christmas, as the Pope had some things to say about it. And we'll look at perhaps why Christmas has become the materialistic holiday that it has become. But let's get started with little George Washington, because who doesn't like George Washington? I personally like George Washington a lot. Would love to meet him. Probably the one person out of all the founding fathers that I would like to meet. And that's a hard decision if you think about it, because there's a lot of founding fathers that I would certainly like to meet. But George Washington, I have to say, takes the cake. And the Strategic Culture Foundation had a great piece entitled George Washington's Advice to Us Now. And I think it's very important to understand just how much insight the founding fathers actually had when it came to putting together the Constitution and the framework that basically, or the foundation that held this country up until it was obliterated and destroyed and became basically another communist country. That, now they'll say, well, yeah, you're helping the Ruskies now if you have a blog or if you do anything that's not in line with the party. I mean, with the, what the mainstream media or the government tells you. That seems to be the way it is. It is a replay of the Red Scare of the 1950s and late 40s. But George Washington, he kind of saw a lot of this stuff and had some advice on his way out the door. So I want to share some of this with you. It says George Washington's final words to his fellow Americans when leaving the White House will soon again become a part of this country's hot political debates. But the person who will be interpreting these words to today's Americans will be an American aristocrat whose viewpoints are actually far more similar to those of the British Redcoats than Washington killed during the Revolutionary War than the actual viewpoints of George Washington himself. John Avlon, former speechwriter for Rudolph Giuliani, and before that, schooled at the Milton Academy and then Yale, is now the editor-in-chief of the rabidly anti-Russian or neoconservative news site, The Daily Beast. And he will issue on January 10th his book, Washington's Farewell, The Founding Fathers' Warning to Future Generations, which is an extended essay of President George Washington's famous farewell address. And here, then, is a passage. This is a passage from that very historic address that our first president actually warned us against going down that neocon path, which our country has basically been ever since the fall of the Soviet Union. It's gone total neocon. If you look at, like, for example, the Project for a New American Century, PNAC, you'll see in their documents. And PNAC was, that was Dick Cheney, that was Paul Wolfowitz, that was all of the Bush cronies that got in there that said, hey, in 1999, we need a new Pearl Harbor. And less than 2 years later, we got 9/11. So same kind of people, same group of people that George Washington had warned us about. And of course, he wrote this when retiring from public life and, ready to kind of call it quits. He gave a warning. Let me read this to you. He says, nothing is more essential than that permanent, inveterate antipathies against particular nations and passionate attachments for others should be excluded, and that in place of them, just and amicable feelings towards all should be cultivated. The nation which indulges towards another a habitual hatred or a habitual fondness is in some degree a slave. It's a slave to its animosity or its affections, either of which is sufficient to lead it astray from its duty and its interest. Antipathy is one nation against another, disposes each more readily to offer insult and injury, to lay hold of slight causes of umbrage, and to be haughty and intractable. when accidental or trifling occasions of dispute occur. Hence, frequent collisions, obstinate, envenomed, and bloody contests. The nation, prompted by ill will and resentment, sometimes impels to war the government, contrary to the best calculations of policy. The government sometimes participates in the national propensity and adopts through passion what reason would reject. At other times, it makes the animosity of the nation subservient to projects of hostility instigated by pride, ambition, and other sinister and pernicious motives. The peace often, sometimes perhaps the liberty of nations, has been the victim. So likewise, a passionate attachment of one nation for another produces a variety of evils. Sympathy for the favorite nation, facilitating the illusion of an imaginary common interest in cases where no real common interest exists, and infusing into one the enmities of the other, betrays the former into a participation in the quarrels and wars of the latter without adequate inducement or justification. It leads also to concessions to the favorite nation of privileges denied to others, which is apt doubly to injure the nation making the concessions by unnecessarily parting with what ought to have been retained, and by exciting jealousy, ill will, and a disposition to retaliate in the parties from whom equal privileges are withheld. And it gives to ambitious, corrupted, or deluded citizens who devote themselves to the favorite nation facility to betray or sacrifice the interest of their own country without odium, sometimes even with popularity, gilding, with the appearances of virtuous sense of obligation, a commendable deference for public opinion, or laudable zeal for public good, the base or foolish compliances of ambition, corruption, or infatuation. As avenues to foreign influences, in innumerable ways, such attachments are particularly alarming to the truly enlightened and independent patriot. How many opportunities do they afford to tamper with domestic factions, to practice the art of seduction, to mislead public opinion, to influence or awe the public councils? Such an attachment of a small or weak towards a great and powerful nation dooms the former to be the satellite of the latter. Against the insidious wiles of foreign influence, I conjure you to believe me, fellow citizens, the jealousy of a free people ought to be constantly awake, since history and experience prove that foreign influence is one of the most baneful foes of the Republican government. But that jealousy to be used must be impartial, else it becomes the instrument of the very influence to be avoided, instead of a defense against it. Excessive partiality for one foreign nation and excessive dislike of another causes those whom they actuate to see the danger only on one side and serve to veil and even second the arts of influence on the other. Real patriots who may resist the intrigues of the favorite are liable to become suspected and odious, while its tools and dupes usurp the applause and confidence of the people to surrender their interests. The great rule of conduct for us in regard to foreign nations is in extending our commercial relations to have with them as little political connection as possible. So far as we have already formed engagements, let them be fulfilled with perfect good faith. Here, let us stop. Europe has a set of primary interest which to us have none, or a very remote relation. Hence, she must be engaged in frequent controversies, the cause of which are essentially foreign to our concerns. Hence, therefore, it must be unwise in us to implicate ourselves by artificial ties in the ordinary vicissitudes of her politics, or the ordinary combinations and collusions of her friendships or enmities. Our detached and distant situation invites and enables us to pursue a different course if we remain one people under an efficient government. The period is not far off when we may defy material injury from external annoyance, when we may take such an attitude as will cause the neutrality we may at any time resolve upon to be scrupulously respected. When belligerent nations, under the impossibility of making acquisitions upon us, will not likely hazard the giving us provocation, when we may choose peace or war, as our interest, guided by justice, shall counsel. Why forego those advantages of so peculiar a situation? Why quit our own to stand upon foreign ground? Why, by interweaving our destiny with that of any part of Europe, entangle our peace and prosperity in the toils of European ambition, rivalship, interest, humor, or caprice? It is our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world, so far, I mean, as we are now at liberty to do it. For let me not be misunderstood as capable of patronizing infidelity to existing engagements. I hold the maxim no less applicable to public than to private affairs, that honesty is always the best policy. I repeat it, therefore, let those engagements be observed in their genuine sense, but in my opinion, it is unnecessary and would be unwise to extend them. Take care always to keep ourselves, by suitable establishments, on a respectable defensive posture. We may safely trust to temporary alliances for extraordinary emergencies. Think about that for a second, folks. What he said well over 200 years ago was true that day as it is today. And look at what the entangling alliances that we have ourselves in right now, look at what they do. It totally and completely neuters our ability to be objective and to take a course other than intervention. Because when you involve yourself or you sign on to a treaty or some sort of agreement, you're bound by that. You're bound by that. Now, that's not to say that, say, a President Trump can tell NATO to go pack sand. But the thing is he won't. It's just that way. Look at how he's surrounding himself and who he's surrounding himself with. Now, I can tell you, and I saw a particular video the other day defending Donald Trump's drain the swamp stance. And of course, Newt Gingrich came out and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I misspoke. Oh, gosh, he's draining the swamp. Be assured he's draining the swamp." And he continued to say, well, just because he's surrounding himself with Goldman Sachs bankers and all this, at least he's not doing it with lobbyists. The fact remains that we don't need men and women of Wall Street in the Treasury. We don't need people with entangling alliances, much as we shouldn't be involved in any entangling alliances when it comes to foreign policy, when it comes to national defense. Shouldn't be there except under extraordinary emergencies, as George Washington said. The same goes for our domestic affairs. The president should not be surrounding himself with Wall Street people in positions where they would have, or Wall Street would have, undue influence. I mean, that's like politics 101. That's good business 101. If you're trying to maintain the best interest of the American people and not the best interest of Wall Street, then why would you go and put Wall Street cronies in there? You want to know why? Because at his heart, Trump is a businessman. And at his heart, he may be trying to do the best thing the way that he sees it, but he's seeing it through the eyes of a billionaire, of an aristocrat. And so you have to expect this kind of stuff as we continue to see him fill out his cabinet and then what's going to happen after he takes office. I think it's very important to understand that we have a president-elect who is very big into the surveillance state, that's very big into the police state, that's very big into a lot of the things that alt media has been covering and denouncing now for quite some time, and also what a lot of independent and what a lot of, quote, liberals don't like as well. Although there's been a shift in that type of thinking and philosophy as we've seen over the last, 10 to 15 years or so, where those lines are being kind of muddied and people are starting to kind of get this 10 planks mentality. And I don't like it. Not at all. As a matter of fact, Activist Post just wrote a piece. U.S. government now asking travelers for Facebook and Twitter profiles. Yeah, this is a problem. And see, this is what happens. Oh, it's optional. It's optional. Hey, but they get you acclimated to it. So when then it doesn't become optional anymore, then it's not so much of a surprise. And Justin Gardner of Activist Post, he writes, continuing in the tradition of sacrificing everybody's privacy to pursue a war on the tactic of terrorism, the U.S. government has begun requesting social media identities from foreign travelers. Politico first reported that the Department of Homeland Security approved an addition to the electronic system for travel authorization on December 19th. The foray into the people's online presence was proposed first in June 2016. This is the actual wording of it. It says, since Tuesday, foreign travelers arriving in the United States on the visa waiver program have been presented with an option to enter information associated with their online presence. The prompt includes a drop-down menu that lists platforms including Facebook, Google+, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, as well as spaces for users to input their account names. Yeah, because the government needs to know this, right? Even though it's optional, Justin writes, travelers are likely to give up the information for fear of being harassed or because they wrongly assume it's required. Even if travelers make their accounts private, the U.S. surveillance apparatus can likely bypass those protections or just demand the information from social media companies. The new measure only applies to visitors from 38 countries on the visa waiver program, which allows for those visitors to visit the U.S. for up to 90 days without a visa. It includes America's best friends, including the UK, and several European countries, Australia, and a few others from the region. So, there's another thing. If there are best friends, right? Why is it that we're going through extraordinary measures and having people optionally give up their online identity to DHS and our surveillance state? Now, if they're coming from some place like Africa, where there may be a hotbed of people that are pissed off because we went and interfered in their domestic affairs where we shouldn't have, and they want revenge, I can kind of see where you might want to throw that out there if they want to come over here. Okay? But Scotland? England? Australia? I'm not quite understanding what the heck that's all about, except they just want to get into your business. Last but not least, the Pope now says Christmas is hostage to materialism, that God's been put in the shadows. Now, Yahoo News is reporting that that's what Pope Francis said on Saturday, and the dazzling materialism that's out there now has put God in the shadows and blinds many to the needs of the hungry, the migrants, and the war-weary. Now, on the one hand, I would say I agree with him that materialism has certainly overwhelmed the Christmas season. But Christmas has nothing to do with God or Christ. Now, people can say and associate it with that, but December 25th is not Jesus' birthday, and it's not biblical, and Jesus is not the reason for the season, as a lot of people affectionately put it. So I would have to say that God has always been in the shadows when it comes to Christmas, because it's not a holiday that God sees as valid. There are biblical feast days out there that are sanctioned by the Bible that says exactly, when it is and how you do it and all that kind of stuff. It's basically 6 Christmases a year. But the December 25th holiday, I would have to say probably the part of the problem is the fact that it's not a biblical holiday at all. So how could you expect God to take center stage on a holiday where it ain't his to begin with? It's very interesting. And then, of course, because it's that way, then how do you think materialism is allowed or able to take over? Now, people can go and celebrate anything they want, how they want. The lovely thing about understanding free will is that you have to respect other people's beliefs, no matter how alien or foreign or wrong you may think it is. If they're not infringing on your civil liberties, if people aren't infringing on your civil liberties, then have at you. Do what you want to do. And I certainly feel that way. But I would have to tell you, don't be surprised if God is not the major focus or part of that holiday when it was never sanctioned by God to begin with. That's a huge truth and realization that I've seen a lot of people understand in recent years, to the point where I don't see as many Christmas lights out when you drive down the road. I don't see as much seasonal things that happen with just the people that I know and the communities that surround me. Now, I don't know if it's like that in your area, but I can tell you, I think there's an awakening that's happening. And I think a lot of people are coming to the conclusion that the things that they were taught are not the way it really is. And it doesn't have to do with just Christmas. It has to do with everything. And the government knows that, which is why the government and the mainstream media and special interests and oligarchs are out to do this whole fake news thing and vilify as many people as they possibly can for spreading information that goes against the narrative. This is all part of it, folks, every little bit of it. And I hope and pray that in 2017, that if this truly is the awakening that I believe it is, that people actually get awake and they fight back, that they don't just sit on their hands, that they get active, and that we push back and show them the true power of the people of humanity. That's my overall 2017 wish/prayer, is that people that they embrace the truth, that they don't embrace prejudices and they aren't judgmental, that they don't fall prey to the I know what's best for you mentality, and that we all come together in mutual love and respect to make 2017 a year that we'll never forget. So with that said, I'm Joe Joseph. I will have another daily news brief for you tomorrow. Have a great night, everybody, and enjoy your holiday.